and today's topic is the future. And we're going to get to look at what the future is to us and what we project forward into it, and how we might become more deliberate and conscious creators in generating a future that we truly desire. So before we get started, let's take a couple minutes to get centered and present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose, hold it, and imagine sparkling, clean, crisp oxygen just flowing into your lungs, flooding your bloodstream and your organs and your cells, enlivening and invigorating. And as you exhale, maybe roll your shoulders and loosen up any tension in your body, let it go. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose. This time, imagine sparkling white light lighting up every molecule, every electron in your being, in energizing and electrifying and connecting you with the universe beyond. And as you exhale, exhale any stress, any remaining tension. And now let's just gently press our palms together. Softly, softly rub your fingers against your palms to feel the delicious sensation that you can bring present in your awareness and your body. And now let's just be here right now together. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so glad to have you here with me and to be sharing this time with you. And this week we've talked about letting go. We've talked about purpose, and today we're going to talk about the future. And what prompts this conversation is I know I've spoken to you about my commitment to sustainability and creating a thriving future for everybody on the planet. And yesterday I had an amazing day. I got to interview 3 different people that are doing really remarkable things that we're going to end up featuring on our podcast, which is really exciting. And so what opened up for me again and again was possibility, possibility, possibility. And one of the people that I spoke with, I shared my vision of the eco park that I've shared with you previously. And he said, it sounds like solar punk. Now, you may or may not have heard of cyberpunk. I've heard of it, but I don't really know what it means. But he said solar punk is a movement of people, or a genre even, that encompasses art and literature, and it is based on a hopeful future in harmony with the planet, and using technology in mindful ways to create a thriving future. And so there were a couple things that came up for me, because as I was digging into this, it looked like, oh my gosh, I found my people. These people, or the theme, or the philosophy behind solar punk is so in line with what I'm up to, and what it's about is creating utopia, but for real. And I think it's really interesting when we think of the future, or when we see movies, for instance, or TV shows about the future. So often the picture that's painted is a future that is dystopian, that is death and destruction and darkness and warfare. And in fact, when I've seen TV shows around the pandemics, there are some TV shows around that, and what we've seen in those TV shows and movies is that things just devolve into chaos. And I think that we can use this moment in our history, looking at the world and the pandemic and our response to it, to see how incredibly civil for the most part. This whole experience has been, and how calm in so many ways, to see that humanity, that people are coming together to support one another, and to we see these tremendous acts of kindness and cooperation, and there's so much that we can look at right now in terms of the response of humanity to this thing, that's truly profoundly hopeful. And apparently hopefulness is and optimism is a foundational uh, part of this solar punk ethos. Anyway, I know that what we put our attention to, what we put our energy toward, how we focus our energy and attention amplifies. And so there are so many examples and opportunities to find things to be hopeful about, to find things to that validate possibility and the power that we have to generate something that works. And I know it's easy to fall into despair, but it's really a function of where we choose to put our attention, because really whatever we're sorting for, whatever we're predisposed to, we're going to tend to see that in the world. I don't know if you've ever had the experience, perhaps if you purchased a car, for example, that all of a sudden when you're shopping for a car and you think that there's a certain car that you particularly like, that all of a sudden you start seeing those cars everywhere. And what's interesting is that your brain is sorting for those things that you have prominent in your attention, and it's not necessarily so that those things weren't there before. It's that your attention wasn't trained to them, and it may be that they weren't there that prominently before as well. It may be that because you have a focused attention, you're attracting those things to you in your experience. I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know how you would necessarily test that. But anyway, I want to talk with you. I hope you'll engage with me around this, around the future that we're creating, because when we come from a place of doom and gloom, that's what we experience, and we keep seeing evidence for it. And I tend to believe that the momentum of that energy has an impact beyond ourselves. Certainly the people that we come in contact with and the people that we communicate with, or in any way, shape, or form, not to mention the energetic field that we create around us, impacts others. And we've talked about how emotions can be contagious. So when we are positive, we get, and for instance, you've seen, not so much with masks these days, unfortunately, but I know that I have, and I'm sure you have experienced, when you smile at somebody, they smile back. When you acknowledge somebody, they tend to acknowledge you back. And even the grumpiest people, when you share some kindness, they tend to respond and maybe lift out of their grumpiness. So let's look at ourselves as generators of the future, and let's put our attention, not to deny. I'm not talking about denying, because denial keeps us from recognizing where we are. We talked about that yesterday, and needing to know where we are in order to be getting to another place. So denial doesn't serve us. However, when we make observations, a lot of the time when we're observing something, what's happening is that not only are we making an observation, but our observation is not objective. And we tend to imagine that we are objective, but the thing is, we're interpretive mechanisms, right? Like our brain, our being interprets everything. That's how we navigate the world. Is this safe? Is this not safe? Is this good? Is this bad? We're always choosing. And in order to make our choices, we often do a shorthand of experience. And what I mean by that is we dismiss so much of our experience, even from our conscious awareness, in order to get to the next thing. Good morning, good morning, good morning, Danette. So great to have you here, and welcome back again, Christina. Good morning. Christina says, the last full moon, I released a lot of stuff that no longer serves me. It has been a beautiful flow of opportunities ever since, and I feel like I literally lost weight. And good morning, Dido. Thrilled to have everybody here. And everybody who hasn't chimed into the chat, I'm thrilled to have you here with us too. So, Christina, it's awesome that you're talking about releasing things that no longer serve you. So, this is a really important thing in looking at the future and how we create the future, because what we do is we create our lives based on our experience and our interpretations. And hi, Tammy, welcome back. So glad to have you here. So we're talking about the future and creating the future. And we typically create the future by pulling the past forward. And so, Christina, when you say you released a lot of stuff that didn't serve you anymore, now you're open to a beautiful flow of new opportunities. Well, that's a predictable result when we let go of the past. We've spoken about letting go. But when we detach ourselves from the past and are no longer dragging that past into our present and therefore our future, then there's freedom for the future to call us forward. There's freedom for the future to emerge. And I think to another point of what you were saying, Christina, is that these ideas, these hurts, these patterns that we carry forward from our past actually feel like weight. Like we experience them as if they are a physical burden oftentimes. When we feel overwhelmed, our posture is different. Our shoulders are down and we may be hunched. And when we release these things, we do feel lighter. We're able to be more present and to stand up straighter and to experience our presence within ourselves as lighter. And when we're lighter, when we're freer of these burdens that we've carried forward from the past, then we're freer to respond and experience the present, and to have different dreams and intentions around the future. And so I know that lots and lots and lots of coaches work with people to set goals, and I've talked about this before. I'm more oriented toward setting intentions. And the distinction that I make between goals and intentions is that intentions have an openness around them. Typically, when you're setting a goal, it's this outcome by this time or by this date, and the outcome is pretty specific. And having an intention creates a larger container. That's another thing we've talked about is containers and uh, having ultimate freedom within the constraint of a container. And it's that dynamic between the constraint and the container that actually can generate outcome. But so when we talk about intention, it gives us, it's more forgiving. It's more forgiving because with the goal, you either achieve it or you don't. And it is a very specific bounded container. And when we set an intention, maybe that particular goal may not be achieved, but who knows all these other things that could have come about as the future calls you forward. Realize that the goal typically is coming from a place that is from the past, whereas an intention is hopefully emerging from within your core. That's when I'm talking about intention, that's what I'm talking about, is to connect yourself to that core and carry that intention forward. Then it opens up the future rather than collapsing it down. Welcome, Maribel. Maribel says, when I feel lighter, I no longer feel a block in my solar plexus. I can literally feel a change. Yes. So the solar plexus, that's a beautiful guide to recognize where you are with things. We feel things in different ways in our bodies, in our beings, and in our energetic field that we don't necessarily identify as our energetic field. But when we talk about the chakras, for instance, we often feel heaviness in our heart. And what you're bringing up, Maribel and Christina, is the solar plexus. It's like it is sort of our power, our forward momentum, our even almost like our power generator internally. And when we release things, when we let go of the past, or we expand to include more of ourselves and into our wholeness, then there is a lightness, there is an opening that starts to occur in the solar plexus area. And one thing that you could do also is consciously and deliberately breathe into that area and allow yourself to feel what's there. And as you presence yourself to what is there, it will grow and expand. It will start moving. And so this whole thing about presencing yourself to your experiences, your emotion, your energy, is not so much that you need to take action and act on it or do something to it, but to be present to it and breathe into it. And what's interesting is then it takes on its own life and it makes its own change. Danette says, this is something I'm working on. I'm still learning to channel that intent. The ego is my big issue and getting back into old habits. And Dido says, I'm going to come back to address that in a second, Danette. Dido says, love the distinction between goals and intentions and how intentions are more expansive. That's really, Dido, that's really my experience, is that intentions allow for the universe to take you on magical journeys that you might miss if you're so focused on making a goal. And sometimes there's a sense of force and drive to trying to achieve a goal rather than the expansive power and empowerment of an intention. And the cool thing about intention is you can get off track, you reset your intention. With a goal, you either made it or you didn't, kind of thing. And so there's room for failure with a goal, whereas with an intention, there it's more alive. You get to live into it. And so back to what you're saying, Danette, is that your ego is the big issue in channeling your intent and getting back into old habits. And so, at this, I think we have been so culturally acclimated for people that are on a path of growth and evolution to diss the ego, right? The ego is something bad. It gets in our way. It's responsible for all of the challenges that we have. And I, again, with this idea of expanding to include, Danette and everybody else, I invite you to embrace your ego as a wonderful tool to have gotten you to where you are in life. And our ego is an important part of ourselves that we embrace, and in my vantage point, and I'm using that as my own hypothesis that I keep testing. But recognizing the ego and as a resource shifts my whole experience of my ego, and shifts my experience of my egoic behaviors as well. And so when I can come into greater acceptance and recognition and acknowledgement and appreciation for my ego, then I'm freer because I'm not resisting it. I don't have to resist it anymore. It's like, oh, okay, so the ego's doing this, or I noticed that I made this choice, and that's coming from this sense of self-preservation. Then you get to follow the breadcrumbs and find out where it's leading to. So if the ego is responding with anger or whatever, or we're responding with anger and we choose to identify that as ego, then we get to say, okay, so what was the threat? We get to use whatever the ego exposed to us as a vehicle for our further growth and evolution. So we can almost use the ego as a compass that helps us to reorient ourselves or recalibrate. And I wonder if, Danette, that connects for you, if that makes any sense for you. And also, when we get a chance, so here's the thing, meta perception is kind of where it's at. And what I mean by meta perception is having those moments of grace where we get to step outside ourselves and kind of observe what's going on, some as dispassionately as possible without judgment, right? So from this meta perspective, we get to look at, oh wow, look at that dynamic. There's that habit again, and what led to that, and what was the experience of ego that was driving it. And I also want to introduce the possibility that this conversation and judgment about the ego in itself is the ego. Like, I'm judging myself. Well, what is the piece of me? What is the part of me that's judging myself, that has expectations of me that I am not meeting? That's ego stuff, right? So Danette says it does actually. I never thought as using it as a resource. That's awesome. It totally makes sense. I agree. So the whole thing here is about releasing our resistance. So as we're resisting the ego, whatever the aspects are of our expression that we're calling ego, those aspects get amplified, right? Because we're resisting them, or we're denying them, or we're fighting with them, or trying to overcome them. And I venture to say that maybe all of those behaviors are ego-based behaviors too. So it's kind of a paradox, isn't it? That this whole concept of the ego, the ego, the ego is the ego speaking. But I think that there's some truth to that, especially when we beat ourselves up about it. So when we allow our breakdowns, which we often associate with the ego, for instance, but when we allow our breakdowns to be opportunities to go deeper, to learn more, to grow more, then we can. That's awesome, Danette. I'm glad. Um, then when we recognize all of this stuff as an opportunity and embrace it as a gift, then we have, or a signal or a compass, then we get to pay attention from a different place, a place that isn't about judgment, that isn't about denial or self-flagellation, right? We get to say, oh, wow, okay, I observed that. I did that, or look at that reaction, and what is it telling me? So all these things are gifts when we allow ourselves to take a perspective that calls them gifts, right? Even our quote unquote curses, if we allow ourselves to recognize them as gifts, because everything has a polarity to it, uh, pretty much anything that I can imagine has a polarity. So as we say this is bad, there's also something about it that's good, and ultimately, it's really just what it is. It's neither bad nor good. It's just what it is. And there's like this neutrality about things, in the truth of things. It's our ego, our mind, our history, our beliefs that interpret things and make meaning, which brings us back around to where we started at the very beginning, which is talking about the future and the creating the future that we desire. And how we do that is by being fuller, more fully and more completely present in the present. And then we can sense what the future is calling us forth into. And I did start this conversation with talking about utopia and dystopia, and how we get to choose. And if you're interested in this idea of utopia and possibility, really truly check out, and I'm just checking it out, but so far it's really resonating with me in so many ways. Check out this cyber, what did I say, solar punk solar punk aesthetic. And apparently there's a lot of positive type science fiction and art, and it values beauty and equality and environmental harmony. And it's just, it is it is a future that I am playing with and working with and declaring into reality. And I spent a lot of time last night looking at all these wonderful, beautiful photographs or also renderings of ideas of beautiful environments and buildings and different kinds of technologies that are available and emerging, and just allowing the possibility of a magnificent and fantastical and remarkable, magical future. And I think the more we can put our attention toward creating these sorts of life affirming possibilities, then the more likely it is going to be to actually happen. And I know it's possible. And I know a lot more about what's out there than lots and lots of people because I needed to, because I needed that to give me hope, to know that it's grounded in actual possibility. And so if you should be feeling any sense of despair about the future, enrich your present with the possibilities that are out there. Start researching things that are hopeful, and choose those things that are life affirming, and that way we can create a future worth living into. And so, with that, I am so delighted to have had you here with me this morning to share this time together. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live each weekday morning on the Facebook page of Enlightened World Network. And as always, I'm inviting you to check out the other programming and the community on Enlightened World. Really, really rich in love and in light. And I just want to say thanks so much again for being here with me today. Hope to see you again soon. Lots and lots of